Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another card video at my YouTube channel and blog. Today I'm going to be using the Magnolia stamp set from Waffle Flower, but really this video is exploring the differences and similarities between Distress ink and Distress Oxide ink. I've had quite a few questions with people wondering like, do I need both? What are the differences between them and how do they blend differently? So I thought I would take the same three colors in each type of ink and I would do one of my ink blending combos from last Friday's video. So I'm using the same three colors. I'm using Old Paper, Black Soot, and Evergreen Bough. And I thought I would just talk about the differences that I feel are kind of more apparent between the two. So the way I think about Distress Oxide ink is it's a pigment and dye hybrid. And because of that, the ink doesn't soak into the paper. It kind of floats on top until it dries. And so because it's kind of floating on top and it's very creamy, when you add two colors together, you have the opportunity to mix them together. So it's almost like if you can envision a paint palette and you put two different colors of paint on the palette, you can mix those two colors together. And when you're using Distress Oxide ink, in my mind, it's a little bit like that. Now, I'm not sure of the full science behind it, so don't quote me on all this, but this is kind of how I envision it in my mind. So when you're going back and forth between colors with Distress Oxide ink, you can kind of overlap them. So let's say you're mixing two paints on a palette, you can add more of one color over and over again until you have the exact mix that you want. And Distress Oxide inks really provide that opportunity. You can go back and forth between the colors until you have a nice even blend and mix. So moving on to the original Distress inks, which I still absolutely love. These are dye inks, which means that the color, the dye actually soaks into the paper. So it doesn't soak in immediately. I mean, it still sits there for a little bit and you can kind of blend it a little bit and kind of smudge it, but it does not float on top of the paper. And I know floating's not the right word. I'm sure Tim's gonna hear this description and be like, that's not how it works, honey. And he doesn't talk like that, I promise. But anyway, in my mind, this is how I kind of explain it to myself. The dye soaks into the paper. So you have to have a lot of layering of color, but you don't have as much opportunity to mix the actual colors together. It's all about layering them on top of each other until they start to blend together. I kind of think of it as if you have two kind of pieces of plastic that have colors on them, when you lay them over the top of each other, they're going to create another color where they overlap. But you're not intrinsically changing the actual colors themselves. Whereas when you're using the oxide ink, you're mixing those ink colors and you're creating a new color. But when you're using the original dye inks, the regular Distress inks, you're just laying them on top of each other. And there's also a saturation difference. Look at the difference here. Now, the regular Distress ink is not dry yet. It will fade back quite a bit. But look how much more saturated and vibrant the Distress ink is in comparison to the oxides. You can really see the difference there. So I'm going to move on and start to make these into some cards. And the first thing I'm going to do is finish drying the original Distress ink version. And you'll notice that the color does change quite a bit by the time it's completely dry. And my paper did curl a little bit, but that's just the nature of the paper and adding heat to it. So you'll notice that they're a little bit closer in color. Here's that example from last week's blending combo video. Really similar colors. They got the same vibe, but there's just a really different kind of aesthetic feel to them. And also the Distress ink, I find takes a little bit longer to dry. I think it just soaks into the paper and the paper stays wet. Whereas with the oxide inks, they dry a little bit faster. Now here, this embossing powder is sticking to that because I haven't helped speed up the drying process at all by heating the oxide one at all. So I'm going to go ahead and heat that one right now. And then I'm going to be doing some stamping and heat embossing on top. So I'm going to test this again to make sure that it's completely dry and that embossing powder slides right off. So I'm going to take the really large Magnolia stamp from that waffle flower stamp set that I showed you at the beginning of the video, and I'm going to stamp this in Versamark ink. I'm using Versamark because it's a great sticky ink and it's perfect for heat embossing. So I'm going to ink up that stamp and then I'll stamp it in place. I did use a powder tool, an anti-static powder tool, just to help with the heat embossing as well, but it's totally an optional step. So I inked up that stamp and then I pressed it down onto my blended cardstock. And I'm going to really walk my fingertips over the entire surface area of the stamp because, I mean, I could stamp it twice if I missed a spot because I'm using my MISTI stamp positioning tool, but I really wanted to avoid having to stamp this twice. So thankfully I got a really good impression, and I'm going to add another little stamp from the stamp set, this like individual blossom, and I'm going to put that right above the really large magnolia. I'm going to put that right above and stamp it in the same ink, and then I'm going to emboss both of these images together. The embossing powder I'm using today is from Brutus Monroe. This is the white embossing powder called Alabaster. And I'm just sprinkling that on, making sure I coat every single area of this image, and then I'll tap off the excess. I'll use my tweezers to hold this in place just so I don't burn my fingers, and I'll run my heat tool over this entire image. And because I was using my heat tool quite a bit before, it's super, super hot, so I was able to emboss this really, really fast. Like this is like in real time how fast it was melting. It's amazing. For the other piece, this is the original Distress ink. I prepped that area with an anti-static powder tool, and then I'm going to use one of the individual blooms from that Magnolia stamp set, and I'm going to stamp that first, and I'm actually going to emboss this one first too, just because that paper was curled a little bit and I wasn't sure if I'd be able to see the image really clearly to add the stem. So I did emboss this flower first and then added the additional stamp image of the stem with the leaves. So I'm heat setting that till it's melted, added on that extra stem down at the bottom, and I'm stamping that in Versamark ink as well, and I'll just add some white embossing powder over the top and then heat set it until it's completely melted. So I really love doing ink blending cards like this with really simple lined images on the top. It's a really simple card, but it has a lot of impact. While I've got my stamp positioning tool out, I'm going to go ahead and stamp the greeting. This is one of the greetings from the stamp set, and I'm stamping it twice. I'm going to put the same greeting on both cards. I'm just stamping this in some VersaFine Onyx Black ink onto some Neenah Solar White cardstock. By the way, this is the same cardstock I use for all the blending. I trimmed down each of these blending pieces, just the larger ones so it would fit on a card, and the smaller ones so that I could have that greeting banner go across and have it hang over the sides. I prepped 2 card bases using the same color of white cardstock, except this is the heavier version. This is the 110-pound version. And then I used some foam tape on the back of each of these blending pieces and placed them onto the front of my card. So here's another little brand new item I'm testing out. This is a tool from My Sweet Petunia. I think it's called the Aligner tool or something like that. I'll have it linked down below. It's a tool that helps you get really precise narrow cuts or layering cuts around your images. So you'll notice that I lined up one of those lines with the edge of my stamp, and then I'm using my X-Acto knife or this craft knife to cut the line. And on this one, I had the wrong line butted up against my stamped greeting, so it's thicker than the other side, but I'm going to bring that tool in once again, line it up with the more narrow area, and then I will use my craft knife to cut this out again. And you can see that you can cut really narrow strips of cardstock, because I didn't mean to like give an example of cutting something so narrow. This was just a mistake, but you can see that it really did cut that other one really, really thin. And then I just used my scissors to snip these ends. You could use that same ruler align tool if you wanted to, but for those such small little areas, I thought it'd be easier just to use my scissors. So I put some foam adhesive behind each of these greetings and then placed it directly over top of the blended pieces. And on this one, it overhangs the sides. And on the other one, I use some tweezers to help get that centered at the very bottom of the card. So I hope that answers some questions you guys had about distress inks versus distress oxide inks. I think both are really great inks to use. And I didn't even talk about the water properties. I only talked about blending today, but I hope that gives you guys a good reference point on how these two types of inks differ.